Good afternoon, Tim. How you doing?
Good afternoon, Shava. I'm well. How are you?
I'm good. I'm readily getting into hiking mode for Nepal
Mm,
in 3 weeks. So I've just
mhm.
been on a 7.5 mile hike yesterday in the rain, testing out my waterproofs. So
Very good.
I'm feeling very equipped.
Did you test out your new £30 socks?
I've got multiple socks and I've been testing them out. Yeah, I've got these things they call toe socks. Don't know
Oh,
if you've ever seen them. They're supposed to be much better for your feet when you're trekking, so to avoid blisters. So
ah.
yeah, been researching a lot into socks
But
and
have you
and
tested them?
yeah, I tested them yesterday and
And
yeah,
how
they
do you have any blisters?
no, I was
I would say that's £30 very well spent on yourself, Shaba.
yes, very, and that's a nice way to segue into today's show. I like the way that you've done that
Thank you,
because
sir.
we are on to episode 4 of our sort of mini series on spending, where we've covered off quite a few different areas on this topic of spending. Do you want to give a quick
Hmm.
recap on the 3 previous ones before we
Sure.
kick off with what we're going to be covering today?
Great. The first one, so I guess that would be 3 episodes back, we talked about patterns of over and underspending, and particularly overspending. What's going on with someone who is kind of consistently spending more than they have, or it's creating problems, and why they're doing it, and can tie into all sorts of feelings of shame and embarrassment, but also an unwillingness or inability to stop. So we looked at overspending, underspending as quite extreme examples. Then 2 episodes ago, number 2 in our series, we looked at what we call more typical or conventional spending. And we did a little exercise about money values or money priorities, and the idea that if you get more clear about what for you are the key things in your life that are really important to you and what aren't, then you can, in a more relaxed way, allow the money that you do have to flow into the things that you've already decided are your values or priorities. And that can be very helpful both ends. It can sort of free you up to not spend on the stuff that isn't important and to spend more on the stuff that is. And that sounds very simple when I summarize it, but actually it's well worth doing. I think you and I have both found that exercise really helpful. And then last week we looked at, in a way, personality types or different styles that different types of people use to make spending decisions. And we talked particularly about a more left brain or thinking or kind of analytical, logical based approach to making a spending decision, and then a more feeling based or intuitive style of making decisions. And we used the example to get into it of your daughter choosing a car, and you had this long list of different specs and numbers to get the best deal. And she said this lovely thing about, I'll know when I have a connection to the car and I'll feel when it's the right one. And we were talking about having access to both ways of being, but most of us are very much one or the other, and then developmentally developing the capacity to either be more rational if we're very feeling based, or actually a little bit more subjective and kind of dreaming into the thing and trusting our intuition if we're more analytical. So we've done those 3. And today, as you say, we want to dive into it's kind of a subset, isn't it? That's already come up a bit. We wanted to look spending on yourself and what that brings up for people.
Yeah, this comes up a lot. I think people will relate to this. I don't know whether it's a tension or a debate around spending on myself versus spending on others, or at least in my life, that's the way it sort of shows up. I think I can see that with my wife and myself. I think we both have very different views on spending on ourselves versus spending on others. And I I've seen a lot, and I don't know whether this is maybe from a cultural angle, that this idea is that you always look after others first and then yourself, that kind of mentality. And that has translated into spending. So we're going to go down that route today. But before we do, what are people sort of going to get from the conversation and why they should listen to the end?
Well, they should listen to the end. Yeah, well, I think the bottom line is if you don't know how you operate around this, like any other aspect of the money work we're exploring on this podcast, you are caught almost certainly in an unconscious pattern, either of finding it very hard to spend on yourself or of finding it very easy to spend yourself and perhaps not spend on others. We're not saying one is good or bad, but we're saying anytime you haven't investigated this or you notice that one or other is difficult for you, your life is more limited. Your money life, how money flows, but almost certainly other aspects of relationship that don't involve money. So what we're saying is if you listen to this today, you can reflect on what are your core patterns? Why are they the way they are? And how do you sort of loosen everything up with money, but also in life and relationship generally? So you're much more free both to focus on yourself and receive and to give in a way that doesn't feel rigid or limited. That's what I'd hope from someone listening to this episode.
Sounds good. So, what's at the sort of root of this tension around, I could spend on myself and I'm okay with that, but I find it difficult to spend on others, or vice versa, which I think is what I witnessed the more common pattern, and often shows up with kids. I'm happy on just spending on whatever the kids need or whatever my family needs, but I find it really difficult to spend on myself. And there's often a feeling of guilt a
Oh.
lot of the time. That for me feels like the biggest judgment, or the biggest sort of negative feeling that comes up when I've had discussions with my wife around, spending on herself would be that feeling of guilt, maybe a bit of shame as well.
Mm.
So should we start off there?
Yeah, let's, because I think that's at the heart of it. Now, in simple terms, it's not for me to say precisely what's going on for anyone, whether it's you, your wife, anyone listening. As a very brief recap of this money work that we do, inspired by my friend and mentor, Peter Koenig, and we've been exploring it. I often say there's three stages. First, we just think in any area of life, I'm dealing with reality. So if I feel guilty spending on myself, it would be like, well, of course I shouldn't. Or of course I feel a bit guilty, or of course, whatever. And that's true for any area of money. If I think making a money decision needs to be logical, it's like, well, of course, you need to have your list of car components and all of this stuff. Or to your daughter, thinking of last week's episode, of course, I need a connection with my car. So step one is we just think we're dealing with reality. Step two, we start to get curious. I call that the detective work stage. Oh, why do I find it so hard to spend on myself? What is this feeling of guilt or embarrassment or shame I have? We start to get curious. And what we're saying in the detective work phase is that the reason the world appears as it does to me, or that this emotion comes in relation to, in this case, spending on myself, is because there's some deeper emotional experience that's got tied up with money. The third step is once I begin to identify what that is, how I start to really free myself to see whatever it is I've tied up with money isn't about money. It's part of my humanity. So that's a snapshot of a very deep process, and people interested, they can check out my website. They can come on workshops. We get really into it. And we've done that a few times actually on this podcast, haven't we? We've gone into all three steps. So in this case, and you're right, it's a familiar pattern to many. If I notice, yeah, I don't find it that easy to spend on myself. I find it easier, more comfortable, more familiar to spend on others. And this, I may have lots of money or little money. We're talking about a pattern. Then the first question is, well, you said your wife, as an example, maybe feels guilty or some shame or some judgment around it. The first question is, what is the judgment? What is the judgment I make of myself, or that I believe or fear that others would make of me if I spent this money on myself? So let me just pause there, maybe give an example and just see what typically comes to mind. We're not here to deep dive with your wife, right? She's an example. But let's say, yeah, a busy mum, but there is some money around. And I don't know what would be a nice thing, but maybe she could go for a nice weekend massage, or maybe buy some really nice clothes for herself, or whatever it would be for her. She's not spending on the kids. She's not spending on the household. She's not spending on her husband. She's saying, actually, I'm going to spend on something really nice for me. And she feels guilty. What would be typical types of judgment that you might imagine someone would worry about around that?
Yeah, it's a good
I
question.
just want to also say, I think we shouldn't be talking indirect about her because she's not on the podcast. Let's
Yeah,
talk in general,
in
because this
general,
pattern will be recognized
yeah.
by many people.
So if we used an example, I believe that someone who's, let's say, has children, for example, would
Mm,
feel a sense of guilt that
mm.
they're spending money on themselves, and that money could be used on giving the kids sort of more experience or nicer things or whatever it could be. That's typically where I think your mind goes.
Okay.
And even for me, to a certain degree, there would be that kind of judgment call on, should I? It comes back to those values, right? That we did sort of previously as well. That if you're not clear on those, then it's quite easy to get wrapped up into some kind of thinking, well, this is how it should be,
Yeah. Well, anytime I hear a should, which you use twice there, there's a judgment. So anytime with money spending, I'm thinking I should spend it here. That's a trigger for detective work because there's a judgment there. But what we need to do is get a little closer on the judgment. So, I'll put you on the spot, ask you a question, see, and then I'll say what comes up often in my work and coaching and workshops. So the judgment might be, oh, I would really love this piece of jewelry, dress, evening out with my friends, but I should spend it on my kids for them, for their opportunities, etc. Therefore, if I were to spend it on myself, or the sort of person who would spend on themselves and that's not available for their kids, that would make them a what? That would mean
greedy,
they are greedy, right? What other words are around them?
selfish.
Beautiful. Greedy,
Yeah.
selfish. Let's see what else comes. That might be enough, really. Anything else that comes?
I
Greedy,
mean,
self,
you could be tying some sort of love to it, maybe unloving or
unloving. Yeah.
bad parent,
Beautiful. Right.
all of those
Great.
sorts of things.
Great. Yeah, I think those are spot on. So this is where we need to take the detective work. We need to go from a general feeling of guilt, unease, don't feel good, to what is the judgment that either you're making of yourself or that you imagine or fantasize other people would make of it. And I don't want anyone to think greedy, selfish, unloving, a bad parent. Of
Mm.
course, we don't. Now, here's the thing. As long as that's all unconscious, all I get is the icky feeling, and there's sort of a fear and a future projection bound up with that. But I can't see clearly what's going on. If that's the case for me, I will find it very hard to spend on myself.
Yeah.
Because anytime the possibility of, let's say, some desire arises, oh, I'd really love that. There's a little bit of what I call a life impulse. That would be great. Oh, it'd be great to go out with my friends, or great to spend money on this, or could be anything. It's not necessarily flashy or ostentatious or greedy. It's just like, oh, that would be great. I'd love that. I'd love that. Um, but then very quickly, this icky, heavy, awkward feeling comes. We might call it guilt, shame, stuff around that. And normally I don't investigate any further. I just go, oh, well, I won't do it. That's where we get very locked or rigid with our behaviors. Once we do the detective work, we go, okay, for whatever reason, I've tied up the idea of spending money on myself with being greedy, selfish, unloving, bad parent, etc. That entanglement is usually unconscious. Now I've seen it, and we can maybe take a third step. We might not do that today. The step is to see it's simply not true. How can spending whatever, X amount on a meal out, how can that make me unloving? I'm either unloving or I'm not. Or more accurately, all humans, let's talk about all parents. We absolutely love our kids, and we have days where We don't really love them when we're
Hmm.
unloving, right? All parents, as best we can, we try and be present, good, attentive parents, and all of us fail, right? And there are times where we miss our kid, like we don't get them, we're not present. So at the deeper level, the truth is we're all loving, present, good parents, at least some of the time. And however hard we try, and it's nothing to do with money, we're all at times unloving or less loving
Yeah.
and not present and not great parents. The truth of it, with all humans, we have these different sides. So the step is to see that my icky, shameful feelings come because I think if I spend this money, I would be an unloving, bad parent. I actually need to see I'm already at times capable of being an unloving, not very good parent.
Mm.
And it's nothing to do with money. And I'm already at times, hopefully much of the time, a very loving, great parent. And that's also nothing to do with money. So we have these deeper truths of our complex human experience. And the mistake is if I don't like to see or acknowledge consciously that, well, I do the best I can. I'm great mum, great dad, but sometimes I'm an unloving, not great parent because I'm on my phone or because I've had a bad day or just because this kid
Mm.
can be frustrating and I lose my temper. All the time, there are moments where I'm just not fully open-hearted and present. If that's painful for me to see, then I can tie that up with money and then kind of think, well, if I don't spend money on my kids, it makes me an unloving parent. But I need to see
Mm.
I already am, and I'm already loving. And strangely, that frees up my money flow. We'll talk about the next step
Yeah.
around selfishness and greed in a moment. But let me pause. How does that sound? How do you respond to that idea?
Yeah, it's so interesting when you kind of get that reality check,
Yeah.
because I was just immediately thinking in the life of clients, friends, family, whatever, that I witness the pattern of overspending on the kids, right?
Yeah.
And so that's playing out in exactly the same way, because it's a case of, well, there are parents who are are tying up that human quality of whatever it is that they're trying to show by spending money on their kids.
Yeah.
And that can lead to overspending. That can be a real root cause of the overspending when you've kind of tied that up with,
Yeah.
by me spending money on my kids and giving them X, Y, and Z makes me a good parent.
Exactly. Exactly. It can be an overcompensation. So it's the flip side of the same entanglement. The belief, the entangled belief, and it all comes from icky feelings I want to
Yeah.
avoid rather than experience. The first thing is if I were to spend money on myself, it means I'm a bad, unloving parent. Well, it's not true. And the way out of that, which sounds very provocative and counterintuitive, is you see, I'm already a bad parent and unloving. Sometimes it's true.
Yeah.
With nothing to do with money. I'm on my phone, etc., etc. I'm not present. I don't listen. I shout at them. I play out all my own trips on my kids. I project my own experiences. I'm already not fully there for them, right? But then again, it's the same mechanism. You're right. What I might think is, again, rather than face that and both accept it and do the much deeper work of really becoming a present, loving parent as best I can, I think, well, if I spend money on my kids, it shows or proves, in this case, I'm a good parent. And then I might get into a real trap that I justify working harder, getting more money because I'm a good parent. But actually, the harder I work, I'm less present for my kids. And what your kids really want at the soul level is they want presence, connection, relationship, because it's what all humans want more than they want stuff or days out. Right. So, yes, you're right. That links to our first episode of this series on spending. It can be a major reason for overspending or over compensating.
Yeah, I see it all the time
Right.
with clients as well, because I think it can be that trying to alleviate that feeling for the
Mm,
particular parent, that they're trying to get rid of it, deflect it,
mm,
whatever, and it's very easy to pin it on a number of how much you spend and to sort of alleviate it. And it's just interesting how we can latch on to that pattern and it just become a default for how we play out for years and years without
Yeah.
knowing.
Yeah. Well, again, this is the key to all our conversation. We live in a society deeply confused about the nature of money and deeply, deeply confused and unaware about how these emotional experiences and aspects of humanity become unconsciously tied up with money. So, of course, we live in a society where we can play this out year upon year because we live in a society that kind of says if you give material stuff to people, it means you're a good person. It's what we should all want, but it isn't what we want. And the one thing you said is we do these things to, quote, get rid of or deal with the icky feeling. But the icky feeling never goes away because the icky feeling is, well, it can be many things. But the way we really deal with icky feelings is A, to face them, and B, to be present to
Yeah.
ourselves and our own kids in relationship. But we live in a society that doesn't say that. It says spend money to get rid of icky feelings, both your own and your kids. So, of course, we carry on. I'm wondering, because we've gone into the stuff about parents and children, many people listening to the podcast won't have kids, or it won't be about spending on kids or them. That might be a choice that parents recognize. But what if we look even more straightforward at this thing about being greedy and selfish? So what if, forgetting about kids, spending money on me is greedy or selfish? I'm thinking, for example, some people might find it hard to spend on them and think, well, there's so much suffering in the world. I should be giving my money to those who need it. Or people in a relationship who find it hard to spend on themselves, but easy to spend on their friends or their partner or something else. So, leaving aside kids, what do you notice?
Yeah, that's a bit more of a tricky one for me. This is, someone who's just, spent a nice considerable amount of money on treating himself to a trek in the Himalayas. So,
Mm,
that feeling of guilt and selfishness, which I think I've had a bit of tension around earning more because of suffering. And I don't know whether we can sort of extend that to spending on myself when there's suffering in the world. And I think we've done an episode
we have,
we
yeah.
have done an episode on that. But generally, I'm feeling more comfortable. Maybe
Mm,
it's as a result of the work that we're covering off in each week on the podcast. But I feel much more at ease spending on myself. I think I've disentangled that
mm,
spending on myself doesn't mean that I'm a bad
mm,
parent or it doesn't mean that I'm selfish or greedy.
mm,
So I feel like I've managed to sort of overcome that.
mm,
So I'm wondering what's happening for the people who
mm,
do fall into that camp. So, like you said, one of the areas could be that who am I to spend on myself when
mm.
there is so much suffering? I'm struggling to think of any other
Well, maybe
examples.
I could give an
Yeah.
example. I separated from my wife 6 years ago. I mean, technically, I should say she separated from me because it was her kind of decision and her impulse at the time, which I should say was, I think, a good, accurate impulse. But I can say that now for sure. But what I noticed as part of my having to process that, and it was a very difficult year, I did a lot of work on myself. Um, One of the things I noticed very early on, like almost instantly, when I really knew, okay, this marriage is over, and it wasn't conscious. I only noticed it. In fact, I remember the story. I was doing some training, and I was in Hampstead, which is quite an affluent or very affluent part of London. And I popped into a couple of shops that I would normally never go into. I think a clothing shop and also like a nice skincare product shop. And I find myself buying stuff literally, not just that it was expensive, that I would never have bought before, some nice skincare stuff and maybe some clothing. And it wasn't like a conscious thing. It was just suddenly I felt able to spend money on myself in a way that frankly I had not felt able to do in a marriage. And the other is I really wanted to. And it wasn't about the objects, it was something symbolic. So it was very interesting. I was doing, I'd say, a lot of work on myself at the time, but this was like I say, an impulse. And I came to realize when I reflected on it that in my marriage, on many levels, I had not found it easy to really look after or care for it, or in a way, I don't want to say invest. I hadn't found it easy to resource myself or look after myself or take care of myself. And we can go deeper. Maybe you
Mm.
have some questions. But the point I'm making is that was connected to money and also not about money. So in my marriage, I had not spent money on myself. We'd had a shared budget. I was by far the main breadwinner. We were growing up with two small children. And the story I told myself, which was kind of accurate, is we didn't have a lot of discretionary income. So I didn't, for example, buy many new clothes. I didn't treat myself to days out. I certainly didn't buy myself a nice skincare project. And that was all fine. That made sense financially. Although the truth is that my ex-wife did manage to spend on all of those things. And I'm not making a judgment about that, but I'm just reporting accurately that within our partnership, we had the same budget, the same kids. She found it very easy to use our money to kind of do nice things for herself, actually. Take care of herself, invest in courses and massages and spas and clothes. And I once joked with her while we were married, because we had a little budget. And I said to her, we sort of reviewed our little spending and our budget. And I said, well, the good news is this year we've come on bang on budget for spending on clothes. We haven't overspent. And she said, oh, that's really good. I said, yeah, the bad news is I've only bought 4 pairs of pants all year. In other words, she's spent my budget. Okay. So the reason I go into that is because there's a polarity there. One of us found it quite easy to spend and resource themselves, health,
Mhm.
clothes, stuff. And one of us found it really difficult. And as soon as the relationship ended, suddenly I found it easy to. So my spending pattern
Mm.
changed. And what I realized, and this is the kind of purpose of this quite long story, is my inability to spend on myself during our marriage was a sign of something deeper, which was I wasn't really looking after myself or taking care of myself. And on some level, and this was very unconscious, it almost didn't occur to me that that was an important thing to do.
Okay.
So for me, I don't think it was about greed. It might have been a bit about selfish. It was so natural for me that my energy needed to be about taking care of the kids and the family and the household that I missed the importance of taking some money resource and using it to keep me well, happy, healthy. And I want to say very clearly, I take responsibility for
Mm.
that. There's nothing to do with my wife. So very often I'm suggesting people who find it very difficult to spend on themselves and their judgments might be about greed or selfishness, they need to become consciously, deliberately a little bit more greedy and a little bit more selfish in order to take some resource and allocate it for their own well-being
Yeah.
and pleasure, because those things are important. And it took me that whole process to see that that's really important for me. And that wasn't anything particularly to do with my wife. That was a pattern I held.
That's such an interesting story.
Mm,
So what I'm sort of gathering from that
mm.
is that there wasn't like an active judgment going on for you in this particular situation, but more of a like a blind spot that
Yes,
you were just oblivious to the need to look after yourself and to resource yourself, as opposed to if I spend money on myself, that makes me XYZ.
yes, that's well put. And for other people, it might be more, I would be selfish. But
Yeah.
I think the thing is, you remember I said at the beginning, we go from the reality to the detective work.
Mm.
So normally the reality is just we don't have the money, or I can't, or I
Yeah.
shouldn't, or I don't even get round to having the time to go to the shops. So I was more with the reality. It's only when you go, oh, well, my wife manages to, or my friends manage to, that you find out the judgment that's driving it. So for me, it was absolutely a blind spot. If I play with the detective work, it would have been something less about selfish. It's almost more, I'm important,
Yeah.
I matter, my needs are legitimate. It's more about that than selfish. Although I say that because they can get wrapped up, because often people who think I couldn't spend on myself because it would mean I was selfish or greedy, it can mean that deep down I'm saying, well, other people's needs are more important than my needs.
Yeah.
And although that's a very beautiful spiritual thing, when it's unconscious rather than absolutely deliberate and freely giving, I'm kind of trapped in, I am actually not important and my needs don't matter. And that's not a great place to be unconsciously.
Yeah. The sort of, it's like the place of the martyr to a
Well, there can
degree.
be a bit of so yeah, I'd separate it out because it can be, I think the deep thing is actually to recognize one's needs are legitimate and matter and important. But yeah, where it can show up, I think this is your point, is I can start to do two things. If it's relational, I can start to feel a bit of a martyr. So somehow, I don't think I did the martyr
Mm.
thing. I did the other thing I'm going to come on to. But the martyr could be, oh, I'm a better person because I
Yeah.
only bought four pairs of pants.
Yeah.
Or I'm a better person because I didn't spend money on this. So that's the
Yeah.
martyr. The other thing you can do is you become a little bit resentful of the other person's spending,
Yeah.
right?
And that can get very toxic.
And that can get very, very toxic. And the resentment is because unconsciously you're a little bit envious of that capacity.
Yeah.
You're actually, they're able to spend money on themselves and I'm not. So I resent it,
Mm.
but actually a little bit of you would like to be more like that.
Yeah. And I really want to stress what feels important to me around
Mm,
this is that it's not about the amount of money that would be
no,
spent, because there will be people maybe listening who've got very little discretionary income, like we were talking about in the second part when we are looking at the values. It doesn't matter whether your discretionary income is in the tens of thousands or in the hundreds.
or tens.
Yeah, but it's being conscious around your own importance and your own needs.
Yes.
And it might be that it could be just going for a walk and buying yourself a nice cup of coffee, but being conscious enough to know that that's okay and it's resourcing you and you deserve to be able to allocate some money to yourself.
Yes.
I think
Yes.
that's the powerful message that you're sending to yourself more than anything, that yeah, that you are important and you deserve to be resourced. And actually, I think we all know that taking care of oneself allows you to probably give back and do more for your family if your tank is full as
Yeah,
well.
it's a really important point. With all of our conversation, it's not about the amount of money. So you're absolutely right. It could be walking down a high street and smelling something lovely in a cosmetic shop and going to buy one bath bomb for whatever, £3, £4, because you just really wanted it and you really want to have that one nice coffee, or it doesn't matter what it is. Or it could even be in the supermarket. You just buy a slightly nicer ingredient because you want to, right? So it doesn't have to be loads and loads of money. The one thing I would say that's slightly different from the way you phrased it, it's not that the spending is a message, because if I say, well, spending on myself is a message that I'm important, it can
Hmm.
get a bit tricky, because then
Yeah.
people who do spend lots on themselves, it's like anytime I think the thing I'm looking for is in the money or the spending, it's a trap. It's almost the other way around. I have to realize I am important. My needs matter. I take care of myself. And I have to realize I'm already selfish and greedy. And that's okay, because I'm a human and we all have those parts. When I realize those things at a deeper level, then in a way, I've already got the message. I've got the message. I'm important and I'm also greedy, and that's okay. And none of that's to do with money. Then I'm more free. So then if I smell a nice perfume shop, if I have any money, then I can use the money for something that I really want. So it's a slight reframing of what you
Yeah.
said.
No, I totally get that. Yeah, we can't conflate with the number, and that's something that we've stressed a lot. So where do we go? Where do we go
Yeah.
next?
Well, I'm wondering for today, I'm aware of our time. I think I'd like to say one more thing about greediness and
Okay.
selfishness. When I've said a couple of times on this podcast, we already are greedy and selfish. We need to see that and that it's okay. Some people might be going, huh? It's not okay to be greedy and selfish. The world is being harmed by corporate greed, capitalist greed, billionaire greed, etc. So I just wanted to unpack that. We've talked about how being consciously, deliberately able to be greedy is resourcing. That doesn't mean I'm greedy all the time. Doesn't mean I take everything I don't need unconsciously. That doesn't help us or the world. But every now and then, or when I need to consciously, I go, oh, I'd really love that. I'd really love to spend the money on me. I need to be consciously greedy and selfish. Otherwise, I can't do it. That's my blind spot. The point is this: anyone listening to this podcast, whether they choose to see it or not, is already very greedy, because they are almost certainly using more resources than the global average. Their way of life almost certainly is more than the planet can bear. And their way of life, whatever their politics or their money or whatever, just by having somewhere to live and heating and transport, maybe the odd plane flight, etc., they are already taking far more resources from the earth than is fair, sustainable, or good for other species, other humans in the future. That is greed, to use more resources than, if you like, is needed or fair. And we're all wasting resources all the time. If I think it's only other people who are greedy and selfish and it's bad, I don't get to see that how I am is doing all of those things. I make it other people, the greedy bankers, the selfish business people, etc. That's actually a way of disconnecting from the reality. So my choice, and you'll have heard me say this a lot in this podcast, my choice is never, am I greedy or not greedy? Am I selfish or not selfish? I already am greedy and selfish. My choice is, do I get to see consciously how I'm already greedy and selfish, and that it's okay? Then I can do something about it. Then I can be consciously greedy and selfish when I really need to resource myself. And maybe I can actually start to change my lifestyle and my purchasing decisions to make a more generous impact on the world. So that's what I mean when I say we're already all of these things. It's just we don't see them.
And I know that was a really hard thing because it's like, what do you mean I'm greedy, Tim? I mean,
Right.
there's
Yeah.
no way that I'm greedy or selfish because we've just tied so much, or we've invested so much in trying not to be those things for whatever reason, that even someone speaking those words in your presence, it's like, God forbid that I would be. But when you frame it, in terms of like the resources that we consume, and we've used privilege before as well
Yeah.
as another word, and just becoming conscious of these traits within us is very liberating. And I think that the hardest work is to acknowledge these sort of negative traits that are within us. And it's still something that, even when you say, well, I'm greedy, it still stings a little because, yeah, we're just not accustomed to sort of owning that kind of material.
Well, I think some people are. So I'm going to say that what you're saying, I really respect.
Mm,
That will reflect your personality,
mm,
your faith, your cultural heritage, and your family and upbringing values. So you're saying for you,
mm.
it's quite hard to acknowledge the truth of your greed. There will be other, groups, subcultures in different parts of this country where no problem recognizing my greed and my selfishness. I'm thinking about certain groups of investment bankers on a Friday when they've made a big deal and got their bonuses, and it's all part of what you do. But that's a whole other
Yeah.
conversation. I'm not saying it's better. I'm just saying some
But do
people
you
are
think
more
they're
comfortable with
consciously,
that.
do you think, no, but do you think they're consciously actually, I don't think anyone likes to admit that they're greedy, because that feels like, we always try and deflect away kind of any negative. And so, although they earn extortionate amounts of money, I don't know whether they're,
Well, it would be a good question. I think we're opening something up and I'm
yeah,
conscious of our time. I can feel we could do another 50 minutes on this. So let's do another episode on that. Yeah, the kind of
yeah,
greed is good Wall Street culture, what might really be going on there would be very interesting.
I think we should. Okay, Tim. So, what are the takeaways from today?
Well, I think the first thing is for someone to notice their pattern. Do I find it easy to spend on myself, or do I find it hard to spend on myself? And we've talked more about those who find it hard. So for that group particularly, but for everyone, I would say the takeaway is reflect on how you consciously use greed and selfishness in your life. And particularly for someone who finds it harder to spend on themselves, maybe reflect on how would it serve your life and your loved ones and the relationships you're in for you to be a little bit more deliberately, consciously greedy in your life. And that might throw up a lot. But how might the human act of just taking resource for myself or taking more time, energy, money for me actually serve what you really want in your life, including your relationships, but not just your relationships? And my guess is anyone who has a pattern of finding it hard to spend on themselves will also recognize parts in their lives where they just find it hard to really ask for or take whatever they need for themselves. So the question is, how would doing that actually really help you and possibly improve your relationships too?
Yeah, being under resourced can be a big problem for quite a few people.
Yeah. And feeling you don't somehow deserve or matter
Yeah,
enough to ask for or take the resource you need.
that's it. All right, Tim. I'll see you next time.
See you next time. Bye.